Okay, first of all, let me say, like, hopefully most people, the idea of what's happening, all those people dying in Gaza is awful and ridiculous. Women and children, tens of thousands of children. Okay, that being said, for those of you that's really interested in that whole part of the world and why there's so much conflict and all these interlayering of things, it's way more complicated and kind of sick than you might even think. And the more you know about it, you see like, oh, well, no wonder there's no solution. And just when you think someone, oh, they're the bad guys and they're the good guys, or they're the victims, there's a lot to it. So you hear a lot of names of organizations and stuff thrown around. I want to just give you a basic guide to understanding some of this and some of the history. In 1967, Israel did an offensive war called the 6 Days War. They went north into Syria, they went south into Egypt, and they went west into Jordan. So the West Bank is a little piece of Jordan that they took in 1967 in the 6 Days War. It was called the 6 Days War because it only took Israel 6 days to win. The West Bank, one of those occupied Palestinian areas, that's not the area that's being cleared out now. The Gaza Strip, which is south, that was a strip taken from Egypt and the Sinai Peninsula that also has Palestinians. That's where all the activity is at now. And then in the north, you had the Golan Heights that was taken from Syria. So Israel did enough. Now, of course, they were doing something offensive because they felt pressured. Egypt had closed the Suez Canal. There was a war between Israel and the surrounding Arab states right when Israel was formed in 1948, and there was another one in the 50s or something. So they've had actual wars with airplanes and tanks and thousands of dead soldiers. All of the wars, I mean, the total casualties are maybe between the three wars might be 100,000. A lot, but I mean, not one of the worst wars. But these are small countries. So, in 1948, there was something formed in Egypt called the Muslim Brotherhood, which is a very religious, its premise, at least as stated, is to form a caliphate, a religious, that the Arab countries should be ruled by religious parties. But the Muslim Brotherhood is also it's not secretive. They do a lot of social work. They run hospitals. They do a lot of humanitarian aid. So the Muslim Brotherhood is old and established. After in the 80s, Hamas, which is what Israel is going after now, supposedly, and that's who attacked Israel on October of 2023, coming on a 2-year anniversary. Hamas grew out of the Muslim Brotherhood, but then broke away, and they're involved. So there's politics there, of course, in those areas that Israel took over. Golan Heights, I think, is just some land. I don't think there was a bunch of people there. I think the Israeli settlers moved up there. There's not like an occupied population. But don't quote me on that. I'm not sure. There must have been some people, but I don't think that many. But in Gaza Strip and West Bank, of course, there's politics. So Hamas, which was formed in the 80s, Hamas is the largest. So there's a bunch of political parties. So the United States, we have Democrat and Republican. Countries there's only two stable systems of democracy. There's two-party democracies, and then there's places, I think Italy has this, there's some European countries that have like a whole bunch, like have 15, and then they have to have coalition governments, like the number 1 and the number 3 vote getter come together to have a majority, So that's how politics are for the Palestinians. Hamas is the single biggest party. Fatah, F-A-T-A-H, is the second biggest. Fatah is more left-wing. Fatah is less radical at the moment, but I mean, they've been involved in intifada and attacking Israelis and all that. They're running the West Bank. there was a lot less attacks and terrorist activity coming out of them. They were not, Fatah was not involved with the October 7th attack on Israel. That was a Hamas operation. Fatah and Hamas don't get along because they battle for the power. Now, let's get into some gangster-ish, because there's always crime in everything in life. Things operating outside of what's supposed to be going on. So, would it disturb you to know that for the last 10 plus years, as Hamas, the dominant political group in the Gaza Strip, and also has some influence in the West Bank, but again, Fatah runs the West Bank. So, the Gaza Strip and the West Bank are two of the poorest areas on earth. There's little pieces of land, there's no natural resources, a bunch of people forced in there in apartment buildings. So where is any economy coming from? Where is stuff coming in? They're sort of under a blockade by the Israelis. Well, there's a lot of tunnels coming out of Egypt under the Sinai Peninsula that goes into Gaza, and I'm sure there's Israeli Jewish people that smuggle stuff in and sell it. I mean, that's what human beings do, right? So Hamas extracts a tax, some say 20%, on all the goods smuggled in to the Gaza Strip, and they have phones and they have clothes and there's cars. I mean, there's stuff there. People are living. So you could think of them as almost like a CJNG, right? I mean, they're taxing everything. And if you read certain news articles in big publications, it's said that two of them have been killed. I don't know if you remember the famous footage where they found, and Sinwar, he was in the tunnel and he was injured and the drone was looking at him and he threw a stick at it and an Israeli drone took him out. That guy so there were three top leaders of Hamas. He was one. He's been taken out. There was another. He's been taken out. The other guy that was taken out, he was living in Tehran in Iran in a house, and a bomb was planted in there months prior, and then they waited till he moved in and they blew it up and activated. So Israel's very effective in doing these crazy operations. Remember when they blew up all the fucking pagers and phones in the Gaza Strip, they still don't know how they did that. It's pretty amazing. Probably because criminal groups now that I think about it, I bet you it's because criminal groups are the ones who are smuggling in most of that stuff, and the Israelis simply made a deal with maybe Palestinian gangsters, Jewish gangsters to do that stuff to the phones. I'm just guessing that. I don't see how else it could have happened. Okay, so these three leaders of Hamas, two of which are now dead, the third may be dead too, I'm not sure either. The guy they blew up in Tehran, they've killed a total of 60 of his family members. They're eliminating. The Israelis don't play. They will kill you and your whole extended family. Your cousin's brother-in-law type vibes, right? But so Hamas was taxing stuff coming in. There's a street drug trade. Syria, the country that just fell, was a true narco state. Syria was mass producing something called Captagon, the most popular drug in the whole Middle East. It's a meth pill. Massive factories, huge profits. The Captagon trade is actually one of the biggest. It was a big deal. You don't hear about it. I mentioned it when I talked about the fall of Syria. It's interesting. And as part of, they were saying the Hamas guys were hopped up on Captagon when they came and did the October 7th attack on Israel, and that's why they were raping women and beating babies. Though it's come to find out, just so you know, probably Hamas did not rape any Israeli women. They treated the prisoners fairly well. They weren't putting babies in his ovens. That didn't happen. That was propaganda. And also remember, a lot of what you read is propaganda, even from big news sources. So I've tried to sift through stuff. So I'm giving you When you read a real academic thing, it's going to be full of footnotes and asterisks saying, well, this is 50% chance to be true. There's a lot of evidence this is true, but possibly not. So I'm giving all these caveats. So these three Hamas leaders were said to be worth a total of $11 billion between them. Probably not exactly true. Probably Israeli propaganda to make them look bad, right? While their people, the Palestinians, are living in terrible conditions in Gaza, and these guys are complaining about it and wanting to fight Israel, they're living in Qatar in these beautiful hotels with billions of dollars. I doubt if those guys personally are worth $11 billion or anything near it, but they certainly were living differently. Though the guy who got killed, Sinwar, he was in Gaza fighting, so he wasn't somewhere else. He was there. They've recently released a photo of his wife from the beginning when the Palestinians all went and when Hamas went and hid in the tunnels under Gaza. That she took a $32,000 Birkin bag into hiding with her. Is it a real photo? Is it photoshopped? I could certainly believe she had a Birkin bag, but I could believe it's photoshopped. You just don't know. So how are we supposed to feel? The point, they want to make you feel like, you know, it's just like what they do in the Ukraine to say, oh, well, Ukraine is just an oligarch country too. It's worse than Russia. Who cares if we invade it? Separate issue. So Hamas. So did these guys have $11 billion? Probably not, but they did have a lot of money. They were taxing what came in. They certainly were, at least some of the leaders were living some of the time pretty upscale lives in Qatar, but so does Donald Trump. So, I mean, it's kind of what most people like to have power for, to live a certain kind of way. Doesn't mean the cause isn't just, I guess. But now let's get to the next part. Let's get to that, as Zip with the Drip would say. And this is not debated, Benjamin Netanyahu, the leader of Israel, has said that this was going on. For the last 10, 15 years, millions of dollars, like maybe 20, 15, 20, 25 million a month in cash, would leave Qatar and be escorted from Qatar by Israeli military and intelligence guards to the Hamas leaders. So Qatar, the Qatari government, there's probably other wealthy, there's so much goddamn oil money over there thanks to the white man inventing the internal combustion engine. Other Arab is probably contributing to it, but it's all going through Qatar. So several $billion in the last decade moved from Qatar to Hamas, with the act Israel helped set it up and guarded the money. Hamas and Israel are always at war. What? So Netanyahu's storyline is that, well, yeah, but that's what was humanitarian aid. That was the money used to buy the food and whatever that goes into Gaza. But the reason there's nothing in Gaza is because Israel has it occupied and barricaded in the first place. So then you need to let someone outside party send massive amounts of cash so you can suitcases with $20 million moving around. It's very easy for, hey, Israeli, here's a few million for you, we gonna steal a few million. So if Qatar sent 20 million, you know, maybe half, I'm just guessing, I don't know, maybe none of it made it to, well, Hamas is known for handing out cash and food and stuff because the people need it in Gaza. So there's that. So now you see there's all these very complex layers of things going on. Hamas's strategic plan when they attacked Israel was for exactly what's happening. Well, maybe not this total G-side, which appears to Israel's trying to do in the Gaza Strip. They wanted Israel to show its true colors to the world of how violent and brutal it was, so that international opinion would turn against them, which it is starting to, or is. I mean, it's hard to know about just the amount of Gazan children killed by Israel and to think that there's any justification for it. And as far as them eradicating, saying, well, this is to totally destroy Hamas, you've facilitated Hamas having billions of dollars for years. So what's really going on? Is all of global politics and all these wars, are they just games set, or they ain't games, are they events set into motion so that the people at the top, who are even supposed to be enemies, they can just make money? Because times of war, the legal system's broken down, no one's watching. Having loads of $20 million move around every month is absurd. Of course, people are stealing some of it. I mean, when the U.S. occupied Iraq right in the beginning, Bush gave Paul Bremer, who was in charge of the reconstruction, $5 billion. My father called it, when he heard about it, he called it walking around money. Because like whenever my father's almost 80, I'm almost 50, and to this day, if I'm around him, or if I'm going somewhere, or if I'm with one of my buddies, he'll be like, come here, and they give me a couple 20s. Here's some walking around money for you. Well, the U.S. government, George Bush gave Paul Bremer $5 billion in walking around money. $5 billion in cash to be in Iraq and be like, hey, Ahmed, you run this neighborhood. Here's $6 million, fix some shit up and don't blow none of my soldiers up. So there's billions that there was just no record even kept of. So if you think there's not a lot of villas in the south of France that were in Switzerland and other places, probably in Europe, it's the nicest place to live, bought by our tax dollars that were supposed to be defending us, well, and it's because the U.S. government was part of it. If you think there's not a lot of U.S. military, a lot of contractors, that's where your tax money goes. It ain't defending you. Nothing was going on in Iraq that was going to hurt us, and it sure wasn't helping the Iraqi people. They were better off under Saddam. But back to Hamas and all that. So there's that symbiotic relationship between the specific head of Israel right now, Benjamin Bibi Netanyahu, who him and his wife just beat a case. His wife was stealing money and collecting bottles. This bitch would collect bottles. That's another story. Now you've heard of Hezbollah. Hezbollah was created, that's more of a religious movement. I mean, so is Hamas, but Hamas has a political element. Hezbollah closely aligned with Iran. Hezbollah was like a mini standing army. They have much more, less political, more of a militarized wing. It was created once again after an Israeli invasion. Israel invaded Lebanon in the 80s and did some foul stuff. And that's when Hezbollah was created, a total militant Shia Muslim, so they're closely tied to Iran. And the hope I think Hamas had initially when this started, they would go in, Hezbollah would attack from the north, but Israel knocked out a lot of Hezbollah stuff. But Hezbollah, and now that Iran is having problems, they can't fund Hezbollah as well. Then you also have the Houthis down somewhere else, but that's another thing. These are all very different groups of people. They're different ethnicities. They're really vaguely united under pan-Arabism, but pan-Arabism died in 1967 when the Arab countries allied and lost in 6 days to Israel in the 6-Day War. Pan-Arabism was more of not a religious thing, but that Arabs have a common culture. They speak a common language. Saddam Hussein was part of the Ba'ath Party. Assad, who fell in Syria, that was the Ba'ath Party as well. The Ba'ath Party was non-religious, pan-Arabists. We're all Arab, and we have common values and goals. There was a socialist element to it. They would get money from the Soviet Union. We should all work together. That, they decided, well, that didn't work too well. We lost the 6 Days War in 6 days. That's when you start to see more of the rise of militant Islam, which things like Hezbollah represent, and then of course Al-Qaeda and all that stuff. But that stuff wasn't going on up. That didn't really pick up steam to the 80s, and it didn't get started to the 70s as a result of, the failure of the pan-Arab nationalist cultural ideal to be able to even hold its own territory against an Israel that felt it needed to be aggressive and invade and take part of Egypt and turn it into the Gaza Strip, which is what they are now clearing out. Part of Jordan and turn it to the West Bank, which is under the control of Fatah, who is much calmer and don't want no smoke. And then you have Hezbollah in the north, in Syria. But remember, Syria is where Israel took the Golan Heights. And remember what I said about Israel helping Hamas get billions of dollars. And the leaders of Hamas, several of which will have been killed, being said to be worth $11 billion. I doubt that, but they probably had some access to whatever they wanted, and they were probably living the life of billionaires. They probably had access to hundreds of millions of dollars. Who knows? Maybe billions. Also, Hezbollah, very heavily involved in the global yayo and ron business because it raises money. There's Hezbollah in South America. And in fact, if you are of Middle Eastern descent in the city of Detroit, Michigan, and you get into some criminal activities, and if you are found to have sent any money to relatives in that part of the world, in Lebanon, Iraq, any of them places where you might have relatives, that gives the feds to be like, oh, you were doing your cigarette tax scam, you were selling you were doing whatever, you were scamming, you were selling fake 5-hour energy drink. There was a set of Middle Easterns in Metro Detroit made like $80 million selling fake 5-hour energy drink. If you sent any of it to the Middle East, we're going to say you were sending it to Hezbollah, and we're going to charge you with terrorism, or you can plead guilty. So there's that. So there's a little primer on just some of the names, places, events in history. That's very small piece of it, but I think that's some of the more relevant stuff that you can think about as you're watching the news now. Al Prophet.